Today we will have Ben Mol as a speaker. He is an obstetrician from Monash University in Australia. So it's 1 a.m. at night and in Australia. So extra welcome to in our daytime Netherlands. You're originally from the Netherlands, and now you're working in Australia with a passion to create really good, trustworthy knowledge in women's health. So we all have questions and answers afterwards. And first, the floor is yours, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Rita and Jenny, for that kind introduction. And hello, everyone from Melbourne, where it's already Friday morning, so to say, here. But I've read the news of the storm, so I hope that you're not too much affected by that. I have shared my screen, and I just want to confirm that you can see that.
All fine.
All fine? Okay. So I work for quite a while on scientific integrity. Um, I've given talks about the size of the problem and the history, but as we move forward, I think I would like to mainly address what we can do about it, and that will be on two levels: how systems can change, but also what individuals can do to detect it with practical tips. So these are my disclosures. And I start, I took this picture 2 months ago when I was in Western Australia. So this is close to Perth. And I took this picture because this is a truck from a private person in Perth who is actually passionate and worried about COVID vaccination. And I took it because I think that it indicates how important it is that the public can trust science. So a couple of words as introduction. If you don't know it, about the problem that we talk about, that is untrustworthy research, defined as research that is fabricated. These are two randomized clinical trials on different topics published in a high impact journal in my field, fertility, sterility, 7 years apart. And if you look at the tables of both papers, then it turns out that there is actually enormous similarity in the numbers. So a green dot means that it's exactly the same number, and a red dot means that it changes one digit. These kind of similarities cannot be due to chance, specifically because it comes from the same author group. And you could have particular numbers like a 4.7 that might happen by chance. But if you look at the estrogen here, 360.3, that comes exactly the same back. That is not happening by chance. And then there is another important thing, that if you recalculate the p-values from this randomized clinical trial, then these p-values are not correct because they're reported as not significant, but they are not. I'll come back on how to calculate that. And the other important thing is that if you find that in a baseline table, the baseline variables are statistical significantly different, then that questions also randomization. So there is a lot wrong with these papers. I could give a whole hour about all kinds of examples. I don't do that, but I first want to discuss how big the problem is, then what we can do as individuals, and then what journals and publishers could do and how we could stimulate that. So the problem is potentially bigger than we think. This is an overview from Richard van Noorden in Nature who reported that in 2023 there was a record number of retracted papers, more than 10,000, partly driven by a scandal around Hindawi that had all compromised peer review. Another way of looking at, because retraction, and we will talk about that, is actually a very difficult process to achieve that, but is to look at papers that are submitted to journals. And this is John Carlisle, he's an anesthesiologist, who is editor for the journal Anesthesiology, and he is the person who assesses all the RCTs that come in. He really has developed a lot of techniques to detect problems, and he reports that 14% of the 500 RCTs submitted to his journal contained false data. And when he starts to ask raw data, that's a bit of a selected data set, obviously, then 44% turns out to be not trustworthy or false, and 26% was actually what he calls zombie, so completely based on non-existing data. And then, unfortunately, but I have to say that these studies come from particular countries more than other countries. So he called out in his paper Egypt, India, China, South Korea, and Japan. Back to my field. This is a Cochrane review on progesterone to prevent preterm birth. This is the most frequent drug that we use to prevent preterm birth. And the Cochrane review reports a 50% reduction in preterm birth and also in neonatal outcomes. So if you read this, yeah, you kind of are quite convinced that this is a good intervention, reliable source, obviously, Cochrane. And then a group of colleagues did a meta-analysis with individual data. And in that meta-analysis, they identified 49 papers. 32, that's actually a large amount of the authors, shared data, and 17 did not. Important and maybe also unfortunate to say that from some countries there was much better sharing than from others. So North America, 14 out of 15, Europe, 9 out of 10, Australia was the best, 1 out of 100%. But authors from Egypt and the Middle East, they were much more reluctant to share their data. And what happens then is that if you redo that meta-analysis and you do it with the studies that share their raw data only, then the treatment effect is not the 50% that was reported earlier, but it's around 20%. So that indicates potentially a concern. And I'm doing this meta-analysis with individual participant data now on a systematic scale. So I discussed the first one, but I've done a whole series. Overall, we have approached 300 authors from RCTs to share their data. 200 do not so, 100 do. And from the 100 who share the data, we think that still about 10% is problematic. And I estimate that from the 200 who do not share the data, potentially half have integrity problems. There's a little bit insanity here. If you have older studies, it's obviously more likely that people do not share data. So from the people who shared data, this is an overview of the problems that we find. So here is in a data set, a repeat of a whole string of birth weights and weeks of pregnancy. One thing I always do if I get a data set, I make a unique variable based on a kind of combination of age, birth weight, gestational age. I multiply that and then I sort the data set, and here you see that there is a large number of patients that are double in the data set. That's also the case here. That actually happens quite a lot, and it's quite a powerful tool to assess the trustworthiness of papers. The fabricator of the week or the month was this person who sent us a data set with a random generator in it. So here you see the formula that was used to create the data. And it's obviously a very interesting question why somebody sends a data set like that. Yeah, how big is that problem then? I work in women's health, and infertility is one of my subspecialties. And together with Chen Feng, a PhD student, we looked into the 1,400 infertility RCTs that were published between 2012 and 2023, so basically the last decade. And then it turns out that the majority of these trials come from China, Iran, and Egypt. So if you add these three countries together, then you have 50% of the RCTs. And if you add Turkey and India, you come to 66%. The breakdown of the EU is down here, where Italy is the biggest contributors, and I'm afraid to say that Italy in Europe is also a country with a lot of problematic papers. I know that this is a sensitive topic. I can't see the audience, but potentially there are many people from outside the Netherlands with different ethnicities, maybe also from these countries. I apologize, but I have to weigh that against the importance of trustworthy research, because this informs patient care. And one way I like to talk about that is that I think that if the governance in particular countries for research is poor, you have a higher problem that you run into these type of problems. So, as an introduction, do we think we have a problem? Well, I think we have, because I talk about randomized clinical trials here. And in my field, I think that 30% of the RCTs are untrustworthy. I'll give some practical experience. One thing important to say is that I like the word untrustworthy. Somebody has
Ben, we are not hearing you. Can you hear us? You're frozen on my screen. Is that the same with you, Rita?
Yeah, the same. I think Ben might be experiencing some internet problems. Let's just give a few seconds.
Yeah. Ah, you're here again, Ben.
I'm sorry for that. I'm not sure what happened. Probably the internet connection failed. I'm going to share my slides again.
Yeah.
Are they back?
Yes.
Okay. So I was explaining that the word untrustworthy is better serving a purpose than fabrication, because you take away accusation there. I'll come back on that. Yeah. So, and then why is it important? More and more people realize that RCTs influence meta-analysis. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to say that I think that 30% of the RCTs are not trustworthy, and I think that overall 5 to 10% of the medical literature is untrustworthy. So outside of RCTs, the problem is less big. This is an example where a major journal retracted a meta-analysis because one of the main papers was retracted, and then the meta-analysis was also retracted. This is an example of a guideline in my field that said that if you have subclinical hypothyroidism, so kind of a decreased but not very severe decreased thyroid function, you should use medication, and that will improve your fertility outcome and reduce miscarriage. And 10 years later, that is completely turned around, because one particular study that drove this recommendation is found to be untrustworthy. So a study from Abdel Rahman is, as decided by the committee, kept out of the guideline, and then they are very polite in their recommendation, but it's actually really an untrustworthy or fake paper. And then that because of the risk of error, this paper is not considered in the guideline. This is a completely different field, PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, where my colleague Helena Teed is leading the global guidelines. And in the context of these guidelines, we have applied what we call the rigid framework, where we assess the trustworthiness of papers before they went into the guideline, and we lose 45% of the 100 RCTs that could inform the guideline. So again, I'm not going through over all the details again, but I show that there is really a problem with guidelines, and that list is very long. And yeah, there is a problem first, I would say, with patient safety. That is with distance the most important factor. But then there is also truth and science and trust in science. And I showed you this picture from Perth. I think that it's really important that the public can trust science, and specifically in COVID, you saw that if science takes important or important recommendations that affect society, then people stand up and say we don't trust it. So it's really our responsibility to make sure that what we bring is trustworthy. And then there are other arguments. I called some countries. There are many researchers in this country who actually work hard and do the right thing, and they are also the victim of the people who produce untrustworthy science. The topic is getting more and more attention. This is a work from an international group led by Xu Jiang from China. I met him a couple of weeks ago, and he looked into the impact of 1,200 retracted RCTs and how they changed meta-analysis. And he finds that a paper has about a retracted paper has about a 10% chance of changing meta-analysis. And we have recently found and submitted that if a paper is retracted after 1 year, that doubles the chance that it's wrongly cited in meta-analysis. Not surprising, obviously, but it indicates that we should not only prevent that these papers are published, but we should also, if we find that they are problematic, try to act quickly. This is work from my own group. So with a group of students, we have looked at 26 Cochrane reviews, 516 RCTs. We estimate that about 1/3 is considered not trustworthy, and that has an impact on the direction of the treatment recommendation of 4%, and it has an impact on statistical significance in 14%. So overall, about 20% of the Cochrane recommendations changes. The second change is also because if you take out particular papers, you lose statistical power and then your confidence intervals increase, so you're more likely to report non-significance. So yeah, that as kind of a second part of the introduction. I am really passionate about it. I really think that we should and can solve it. So what can we do about it, and also what can you do about it? I think one thing is really important is that you become aware that what you read actually might not be trustworthy. That process took a long time for me. 10 years ago, I would have not, I would have looked completely different to papers than I do nowadays. We have published 2 years ago the tracked checklist. That is a checklist with 7 points that helps you to see if a paper actually could be executed as it is reported. And this is not rocket science, but what we do, for example, is we look at trial registration and see if the trial registration matches the paper. We look at the author group. Studies, big RCTs with a small number of authors are suspected. You can look at other work of authors or the institute. We look at plausibility of interventions. There are, yes, things that are just not feasible to do, 2 interventions and then 1 placebo. Studies that use envelopes and at the same time use a placebo. These are people who usually write or copy something from a textbook or another study, but don't actually know what they're doing. Time frames can be implausible. So in my field, a pregnancy takes 9 months. So if you submit a paper that reports on the outcome of pregnancy very short after completion of the study, that is not possible. Then there are implausible loss to follow-up data, exactly equal groups. One thing that I don't have a slide of, but it's a substantial number of papers that have tables with only even numbers in it. That is also extremely unlikely to happen by chance. And then I showed that you can look at baseline characteristics from RCTs. You can redo calculations, and you can look at the size of a treatment effect. So if you do that and you do meta-analysis, then I think we should move to a different way of reporting meta-analysis, where we already filter out the untrustworthy studies. I mentioned meta-analysis with individual data. I'm doing that routinely. This is one example. And then in green, we report the data that we think are trustworthy. And in red are the data that are not meeting the trustworthiness criteria. So actually, this is again kind of an issue of wording. 2 or 3 years ago, I would probably have said here fabricated data. But I think it's smarter to say not meeting the trustworthiness criteria. Actually, looking at the picture now, I think that here also we should have said not meeting the trustworthiness criteria rather than labeling studies as untrustworthy. But the consequence here is that in the old model, where you take all the studies, you would see a significant benefit here for oral misoprostol. But once we limit ourselves to the studies meeting the trustworthiness criteria, then that significant difference is disappeared. And if we look to the studies sharing raw data, then there is really completely no effect. So it's really important to do this. I think we should write and report to journals. I'm doing that. This is a paper that we published earlier this year in the British Journal of ONG, and it's our experience with writing to about 900 papers that we considered problematic or not meeting trustworthiness criteria. The importance of this slide is in two ways. One is that from the 183 investigations, we were right in about 250, so 150 retractions, 77 expressions of concern. That has increased now, so we are currently at 270 retractions and about 100 expressions of concern. The second important thing from this slide is that an enormous amount of papers is pending because the journals take an enormous amount of time to take decisions about papers. And you see that here. So this is a Kaplan-Meier curve indicating the time to decision. After 12 months, only 12% of the journal editors have made a decision. After 24 months, that is 25%. And it really takes a very long time for decisions. That happens through all journals. So the picture in terms of the time that is needed and the number of retractions is about the same. And also, if we look to publishers, then there is a similar pattern. I must say that, and I've got a couple of other comments on that later, that there is definitely, I think, a change in mentality with many publishers. A couple of years ago, if you started to complain, there was no structure and no process. But Elsevier, for example, Taylor and Francis, recently Springer, have formed committees and processes internally to deal with that problem. So I don't think we're there, but there is definitely an awareness and a change that, or an awareness that this problem should be solved. Frans Rauwman is a gynecologist in the south of the Netherlands. I knew him from earlier collaborations. He was editor of the European Journal of Contraception and Reproductive Health Care, not a big journal, but specifically on this topic of contraception. Frans is an expert in that field. And I called him, I said, well, you have a problem because there are a substantial number of papers in your journal that I don't trust. He picked it up seriously. He wrote a very insightful editorial that I show here, where he said, I didn't believe the problem first. I had to take my head around it. But then he worked according to the rules, and 18 of the 19 papers that were flagged were retracted. So he shows actually that within the current regulations, this problem can be addressed. This is a slide that I'm quite proud to show, and I might demonstrate it if there is time even later, together with a group of colleagues here in Melbourne and people from the Department of AI. Have developed a tool that can be used to read out software or read out PDFs. So the way this works is this is the interface that you can that you get if you open this program, and then you can load a PDF. And once you have done that, by clicking on extract, you can download very quickly the tables, but then in an Excel file format, and that is very handy to do subsequently calculations. I've also developed together with colleagues a spreadsheet. I must actually give the credits for this spreadsheet to Nick Brown, and this spreadsheet takes the means and the standard deviations from the tables here. And then recalculates the p-values of the papers. So the way that works is you copy the author name, whether it's baseline characteristics, whether the study was randomized, which characteristic it was, and then you take the means and standard deviations and sample sizes, and then the program or the spreadsheet calculates the p-values as compared to the p-values reported in the paper. And that, I think, is a very powerful way to see if the statistics are correct. We're not interested in small differences, but by colors, the problem in the software indicates if there is a big mismatch between the reported and the calculated p-values. And the other important thing that it does, if you download or select only the baseline characteristic p-values from RCTs, then you can see if the study is truly randomized. So this is work from one author, multiple papers of that author, all the baseline p-values, and we've plotted them here in a cumulative distribution. You would expect that that follows the line y is x, and it doesn't. So this really questions adequate randomization, at least in some of the papers. And you can also see it here. There is a series of very low p-values that you don't expect if the studies would be truly randomized. I think this is quite a powerful technique. I think it's also powerful to look at the work of one author group. We've written on that in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, and this is an example. Suez Canal University, 141 articles, 23 RCTs. This is a similar plot as I just showed, where you can see with about 25% of the p-values from the baseline table statistical significant, there is really a problem here. One other powerful tool is Google Scholar. Google Scholar for me is more powerful for this particular purpose than PubMed because it really extracts everything that is out in the internet on a particular author. And that allows you to compare papers of that author on the same topic. So this is an example of an RCT that is published, but then if you look into Google Scholar, you see that there is also a meeting abstract of that same study, but that meeting abstract actually speaks about a prospective cohort study. So specifically, Google Scholar helps you in identifying papers from one author on a similar topic, and it helps you finding the contradiction. This is another example, same way. So here this is presented as an RCT, whereas if you look into the abstract that you find through Google Scholar, it is called a prospective pilot study. Again, I'm not so much interested in the question whether this is fabricated or not, but if somebody reports a study in an abstract as a prospective study and later as an RCT, I just don't want to use that study to inform my clinical practice. If you're not familiar with Retraction Watch, that is another powerful source. So Retraction Watch is a website that reports on all kinds of stories around retractions. I am an actor sometimes in the news feuilletons also, but it also has a database that collects all the data on retracted papers. If you not have installed PubPeer, do that. PubPeer is a software skill outside of PubMed that allows people to comment outside of the peer review process on particular papers. And I have here an example of, I have installed it in my computers. And what happens is that if I open a particular paper, whether I have the PDF or it's in a PubMed search or in an email, if that paper is mentioned in PubPeer, then PubPeer automatically pops up on my screen and I can click and see whether other people have commented on this. So this is a particular example of a study with problems where I have commented on. And if you now open and you have PubPeer installed, and you open this paper in PubMed, then automatically you can link that to my comment, and that is a very powerful additional source that goes outside of the formal peer review process. So the journals cannot block this, so to say. And also I would encourage people with concerns about papers to publish that on PubPeer, because there is a lot of euphemistic language going on in retractions, and at PubPeer, well, you have obviously to be polite and factual, but you can much more clear express what the problems are with papers. There's still a long way to go. I'm particularly disappointed with the response from publishers and editors. This is a couple of examples. This is two large RCTs from Dr. Kaliskan from Turkey. And here he reports on rectal misoprostol, and here he reports on oral misoprostol. So it's clearly two different RCTs. But if you look more careful, then the tables of these two RCTs have very similar data. And he doesn't report that this was one trial with 6 arms. I wrote to the journal. I thought, well, this is clearly going to be at least an expression of concern. But the journal says after an investigation, we have decided not to pursue any action against the author, as we do not believe that there is ample evidence of misconduct. And here is the Kaliskan papers, with two sample sizes of 800 in Cochrane. This is another example, Dr. Majet, who does a study on premenstrual syndrome and swimming exercise. Well, if you see the picture in the paper, it has nothing to do with swimming. And I looked a little bit further with Google Image. That's also a powerful tool. Google Image allows you to find similar images on the internet. And this image that I found in his paper was actually published in a Vietnamese blog long before he published his paper. So I thought this author also has 20 retractions. The journal will retract this article, but they didn't do it. They removed figure 2 for legal reasons and left the paper out there untouched. Dr. Safariniat, if you see these type of p-values, you can already expect problems. If you recalculate them, they're all wrong. Dr. Safariniat has an enormous amount of problematic papers. Here, I already called it. It's always good to look at even numbers. If you have this type of even number of even numbers in your tables, then that is unlikely to be correct. Still, Wiley doesn't take any action. So Paalman, the responsible manager, says we have followed due process and we are not going to do anything about these papers. Even worse, this is the editor-in-chief of that particular journal, who has himself sent me a data set with I think 280 patients that are based on 2 times 140 patients. This is 2 years ago, and there is no action from the journal. And it goes on and on and on. This is Italian authors who have duplicated papers, and the journal says, yeah, we got the raw data, but we don't see anything wrong with it, which is really impossible if you look at the amount of duplications they have between papers. So unfortunately, editors still say, yeah, I don't have time for this. It happens everywhere. We're working on it. And one editor said, we cannot keep up with the number of complaints you send us. I said, oh, wait a minute. It's the other way around. I cannot keep up with the number of problematic papers that you publish. But there is change. When we spoke in preparation of this webinar, Rita and I mentioned the same name, Chris Graff from Springer, who is responsible for the BMC journals. I had an enormous amount of problems with BMC pregnancy and childbirth, but I must admit they have changed their structure. They have appointed an editor or an employee who works on in integrity, Haley Henderson, and the number of retractions is really happening. These are the retractions from the year 2025, and there is a retraction now every week. So I think we can change things. COPE guidelines are changing. So for those who are not familiar with COPE, COPE is the Committee of Publication Ethics, established by the publishers, and therefore, in my opinion, not a neutral group, but they establish the guidelines on how to do expressions of concern and how to do a process for retraction. So journals follow these guidelines, but they change. The recent guidelines are saying that for expressions of concern, for example, if it turns out that the investigation is going to be long, then COPE says you can or you should publish an expression of concern within several months. Well, this is really a breakthrough as compared to what it was, because earlier there were no timelines. So this is also moving. You can, if you're not happy with how journals behave, ask COPE to mediate or raise a complaint. You have to be a COPE member to do that, but that's not very expensive. I think it's 50 euros for a year for an individual. And I'm doing that. So if a journal really is not responding, then I write to COPE. Also a slow process, but it makes people potentially see things different. This is an example of the journal Nutrition that I wrote to, and I said, well, there is an author who has 50 retracted papers. So you have also published, and they say, no, we're just going by the paper. If you can't say anything about that paper, we're not going to investigate. So this was their text back, and I said, well, in that logic, if British Airways has 50 or dozens of plane crashes, and you say they're only gonna investigate a plane if there is a specific problem with that plane. Yeah, that's not how it works. Of course, I'm gonna report the journal here to COPE and see what COPE gonna say about that policy. In my field, journal editors have come together to collaborate, and they have told me that they are gonna file mass retractions and mass expressions of concern against the work of one author at once, which is also something that I think should happen. One personal note: it's not an easy journey. I get a lot of complaints and attacks against me, letters of lawyers, etc., etc. So I have good advisors. I'm careful in what I say. I don't accuse people in public, but I try to be factual. But still, there is a lot of attacks on the whistleblower. But it's moving forward. I already said this is a little bit older slide, to 70 retracted papers, more than 100 expressions of concern. And more important, there is really a change. So 5 years ago, 70 RCTs in my field per year from a country like Egypt. Now it is only 10 to 15, and particular problematic authors who published 27 papers as a group together now don't publish anymore. There was attention in The Economist a year ago now, and it was interesting to see actually that the attention had to come from outside medicine. I think medicine is conservative. We will maybe hear about other science fields, but I think that it is that the public is not accepting what is happening in our field. And then, the trust in science, ironically, but also worryingly, the Trump government is using the lack of action against these problematic papers as their own action, so to say. So they criticize people who do not, universities who do not retract papers, etc., etc. And it is a scale from kind of being critical on the standard in science to kind of attacking science and saying that it is not reliable. And again, I showed it earlier, that is the trust of the public that we really have to earn. Other fields are acting different. If you look at Boeing, Daihatsu here is an example. If they have problems in their safety, they immediately act and report. Boeing maybe not as quick, but definitely not as slow as medicine. So to summarize, I think in large areas of the world with limited research governance, there is a large amount of research fabricated and untrustworthy. The publishing system is not able to deal with that adequate. Maybe I'm too negative here. And I must also say that I'm surprised and worried that so many colleagues in the academic and clinical community, for various reasons, are looking away. So I think I have indicate what you can do individually. There is a lot of techniques available to assess papers. I encourage you to do that. I encourage you also to write to editors and publishers. And I think we should also work together in groups and report that what is happening here is really not acceptable. And with that, I give back to the chair and I look forward to your comments and discussion. Thank you.